Great. Thank you, everyone. Sean from DEFRA has had to go to his next event, but obviously David and Rob remain here, so we can do some questions. How to sum up? We've got 20 minutes or so just a couple of quick thoughts. First of all, I hope everyone's learned something from this morning. I hope it hasn't made too many people too nervous. I've learned that Rob's doing at least 3 jobs and has promoted himself a couple of times while I've not been watching. And David inflicts visits to warehouses on his children. I don't know whether the RSPCC needs to know about this, but we'll see. Otherwise, I think for me, my takeaway is there's clearly good news and bad. What we've seen this morning is that processes for moving beverage alcohol to and from the EU and also to and from the rest of the world they're at least they're well established and they're well understood for our industry. We spend a lot of time looking at compliance. It's pretty complicated, but there are a lot of systems in place. The good news is that wherever we end up on Brexit, this gives us an advantage. Those things are in play. The bad news, and sorry, I should probably also add that it's probably easier to change from an EU system to the rest of the world system than suddenly to have a completely new system to operate. Now, we may well, I hope, be able to improve it, and the idea of a single system for all alcoholic goods coming in and out of the country, is somewhere, I admit, quite far off, but could be advantageous. Plenty of systems at the moment. The idea of having one in principle that is hopefully simpler is something that we at the WSTA will certainly aim at on your behalves, but I can't promise it anytime particularly soon. I think the less good news is that change invariably means cost. There is going to be change. Some of that change is not yet clear, and all of these things will require cost, and of course, if change is incremental or bit by bit, the costs don't necessarily all come in one go, and they're not always visible. Choices are required. We will do what we can to keep our members informed. You may well find out some of this stuff before we do, so please, this is a dialogue. Keep it coming both ways. Small is beautiful, but also probably sweaty. By which I mean, small is beautiful. Lots of you are small companies. We have an enormous number of SMEs in WSTA membership, certainly the majority. We recognize that it is the bigger companies that have more resource available to look at some of these things. We would like you to think of the WSTA as supporting you all, and the smaller you are, it may well be the more that you need us, but our relationship with our bigger companies puts us in a place to help you. What we will try and do, and we love to be able to do things bespoke, but the point is, with something as big and complicated as Brexit, the idea is to garner as much information as we possibly can to do events like today, where we can give you a general idea of what we expect to happen. We won't always get it right, but we will, I promise, always try to be clear about what we know versus what we assume. Tariffs. We've had and heard a lot on tariffs. I won't go into a great amount of detail about that, but we can certainly have questions. Rules of origin. Some of you might be a little disturbed, as I am, to see how much turnover there is in sort of things like the rules of origin team at DEFRA, but I think that's not unusual for government officials at the moment. The good news is we have someone who was standing up here earlier who said he was here to help. Quite right too. Let's take him up on that. Scrutiny. I think it is unavoidably true that there will be greater scrutiny on movement of goods the other side of the next chapter of Brexit, whatever it looks like. That is not comfortable necessarily, but it is a fact. And I think along with that goes accelerating complexity, more time spent doing things, checking things, and therefore more cost. It's not a nice message, but I think it is clear. I'm going to stop there and ask for questions. I think what we're going to do, just to make this a little bit easier, we've got WSTA team members who can answer questions at the front. I may even know a couple of answers myself, but of course I'm good at delegating, so it mainly go here. If we take 3 questions at a time, that will enable us to get through a few more before we break for lunch as sharp as we can at 1 o'clock. So I'm not going to oblige anyone to ask questions, but has anyone got a question from any of the sessions they've heard so far this morning? Great, we've got one taker. It's always nice to have the first question out there. Please, if you just like to say who you are and where you're from, just to give us an idea and maybe help with the answer.
Laura Hardy from Fresnet Copestick. I just had a question about the IPR customs warehouse. When it's mentioned about temporary storage, how long is temporary?
Very good. I can see David already getting up. Have we got 2 more questions that we can put into the mix, or have I got to put David straight on the spot already? This is good. Okay. Second question. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name's Joe. I'm the supply chain manager at Jascott's Wine. I've got a question on small producers and MVVs and how will that change after Brexit?
Okay. Good. A third. Do I have a third? Oh, I do. Look, excellent, at the back.
Charles. Gosh.
It's Charles. It's
Maxwell.
definitely Charles. Charles Maxwell, Thames Distillers.
Thank you very much, Miles. Just a question. For all our exports, we deal on an ex-sellers basis or ex-distillery basis. I'm assuming that for my sales to Spain, once we get to D1ND, that I can treat Spain just as we treat sales going to the USA, for instance. Or will my Spanish customer need a UK EUR01 number?
Good question.
Very good. That's 3. David.
Is that all me? Temporary storage, I don't know. I'd need to check. I suspect if you were putting something into storage without any clear idea of where it was going, that wouldn't be viewed as temporary storage. But if you had a contract that said these goods are going somewhere in X months' time, that probably would. But I would need to check that. MVV, that's not actually an acronym I recognise. Oh, is this as in EMCS simplified procedures? Okay, which I think will still be available in the UK. So instead of doing an EAD, I mean, this is usually for transit between 2 excise warehouses in the same state, isn't it? I think if simplified procedures are available to them now, I would expect them to be available in the future. It's just the destination would be limited. It couldn't be a UK destination. It would have to be an EU destination. But the point is that to get goods in duty suspense from a warehouse in the EU to some proximity to a port of exit, you're going to need to use EMCS or an authorised substitute. And if there's a simplified procedure available, I don't see any reason why they shouldn't use it, assuming that the authorities in those countries continue to allow them to. But if it's available, then it can be used. And the last one, Charles, about ex-works contracts, but we're talking here in the opposite direction. So rather than wine from somewhere in the EU ex-works to a UK supermarket, we're talking about, for example, a gin product ex-works from UK to Spain as opposed to South America. Yeah, I can't see why it would be any different, and who's got an EORI number. Well, in that example, it's the exporter that needs a UK EORI number. So if you're doing an ex-works contract, somebody might have taken risk at the point where they pick up the goods. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're the exporter of record for the purpose of filling in an export declaration. So I would think that whatever you agree with your ex-works customers now, you'd be free to agree with your ex-works customers in future. But it's a matter of ensuring that the contract terms and the parties on record for the export process actually line up and match, rather than just filling in any old name in a box, which is not a good way to deal with it. But yeah, you should be able to deal with it as you do with an export to South America.
Good. Thank you, David. We should have done this the other way around. I should have left you here. Any more questions? 3 more. Yes, 5 rows back.
Thanks. My name's Mike Bentley from Jigsaw Drinks. Currently, back labels from France, Spain, etc. have got the details of the winery, the address. Are we saying going forward, we're also going to have importer details on those back labels as well?
Just see if we've got a couple more questions, just because it'll make it a little more efficient. Yes, one more, right at the back on the left.
Hi, I'm Kate Thompson, Off-Piece Wines Commercial Manager. It actually links to Mike's question. If we have a branded product in Spain that's been collected by a retailer, would their address need to be on the label after the tolerance period, or could it be Off-Piece Wines?
Okay, good. Freddie, you've got a couple more there.
John Leach from Heraldica. Just wanted to know whether we can foresee any eventuality in which the EMCS will remain open and that documents can be closed in the UK. Are we only talking about this, the destination being changed in the event of no deal, or is that going to happen anyway?
I can see Hal is on the same row, so we're going to have a fourth. I'm breaking my own rules, just quickly.
Thank you. Hal Wilson from Cambridge Wine Merchants. Going on from the back labelling, what should we have done already, or what might we want to do quite soon if we wanted to import wines with organic certification?
Okay, great. Freddie, I'm going to ask you to pedal this way. David, you go first.
The EMCS one is if we have a no-deal Brexit, then access to certain parts of EMCS switches off immediately, and that just happens. If we have a transition period, then we stay in EMCS for the length of that transition period, and HMRC recognise the effectiveness of EMCS, and I think would like, if possible, to negotiate that we retain it. But we can't guarantee that that would be successful, and what might be traded off in the future. But I think there would be an aspiration to keep EMCS if we could negotiate it. But we absolutely can't guarantee what will happen, and in no deal, then bits of it get switched off, and there isn't much negotiation around that, I'm afraid. The labelling issues, I'm going to slide my shoulders off to Bex on that.
Thanks, Bex.
Thanks. So on labels, in the event of a no-deal Brexit, from day one for 21 months, if your product's on the UK market, it's relatively simple. For 21 months, you don't need to change your label on the UK market for that entire time. You can also place any product on the market during that time, and it can continue to be sold until exhaustion. So during those 21 months, even in the 21st month, you can place your product on the market in the UK and it can continue to be sold until exhaustion. And I'll come on to in a bit about what placed on the market necessarily means in practice and how to define that. If your product is going to the EU, if it's placed on the market before the date that we leave, you can, again, it can be placed on the market and continue to be sold until exhaustion without changing the back label and having an EU importer address or producer vendor or can't remember what the other one is, for wine. In the event of no deal, though, if you place your product on the market in the EU from day one, no deal, you will have to have an EU import address on the label, or producer, vendor, what's the other one? Producer, vendor, or bottler. That's the one. With the word bottler, sorry. So that's that. If your organics is slightly difficult, if you're importing an organic product to the UK and it has organic on the label, you should be able to continue to sell that good on the UK market. DEFRA has essentially said that they will turn a blind eye, which isn't particularly helpful considering that people want to make sure they're compliant and not breaking the law. But there should be some more information about that, and there is some information online as well. I'm not covering that today, but I can send out some information with the slides. If your goods are going to the EU logo will no longer be compliant. There is some flexibility there if your goods are coming from a third country, for example. So if you import, for example, an Australian wine in bottle to the UK and it's organic, and then you resend that back out to the EU, that wine can continue to have the EU organic label on because the producer itself will be authorised by the EU to be able to continue labelling it as organic. What we do know is that DEFRA has said that they are completely ready to lodge the UK organic certification bodies such as the Soil Association in the EU as soon as possible. The only difficulty with that is we don't know how long that will take to go through in the EU, and it might not actually be on the top list of their priorities. So yeah, it's definitely one to look out for. It's quite difficult, and I'll send around some further guidance there, and I'll talk more about labelling later. Thanks.
Yes, so we will come back to labelling this afternoon. I mean, I think there's two quick rules of thumb. One is if we haven't got new advice, then you have to start from the status quo. Doesn't always guarantee that the status quo will remain as it is, or that it's entirely, black or indeed white. It may well be a grey area, but we have some, we have some indication, and we often have conversations with colleagues at DEFRA who are reasonably open with us, and we're grateful for this, that it should be okay. Now, very occasionally it was like that prior to Brexit. As soon as Brexit hoves into view, then it's even more the case that every now and then they will only be able to say something as strong as it should be okay, or perhaps we haven't got to it yet. What we endeavour to do in sort of the relationship we are trying to have with DEFRA, which is the sort of sponsor department for the industry, is one where we're open with them. And if we can think of a way around something, I don't mean that as in we're trying to avoid it, but a way that is practical for businesses, then we are in a good place to suggest it. So if you have an issue, please do talk to us about it. There's certainly no indication that government's looking to crack down on grey areas. What they're trying to do is find solutions, and I think I would expect the government, indeed any government, the other side of a Brexit, whether it's no deal, hard, soft, boiled, we would look to have a conversation with them that allows us to provide practical advice to you. What they want is for businesses to keep on functioning. That is certainly the end goal. So the more you can discuss it with us, the more we'll be able to discuss it with them. We can't always just do it in a bespoke way, but actually lots of our members are seeing similar problems. Okay, we've maybe got time for one more question, if there is one. I'll take one more. Very good, we have a taker at the back.
Yeah, it's Dan Shearer from Davies Wine Merchants. Just a question regarding registered exporters for some of the smaller suppliers that we work with. Is it just the EU EORI they'd require, or are there extra legislation they need to get arranged?
David, is that going to be you again?
I mean, the starting point is that they will need an EU EORI number to be the exporter of record. Now, to get that, like with EMCS, you need to have your registration as an excise dealer. With things like temporary storage, you need to have a deferment account. If you have a deferment account, you very often need to have a guarantee. If you're one of the parties to a movement, you'll be one of the people who might be eligible for giving a movement guarantee as well. So I think there is almost certainly other things that they will have to do. I think that's going to vary within their own country, even though you might find a common requirement around Europe, it won't be done quite the same way in each different member state, which means I think there'll need to be quite a lot of conversations with producers large and small about mutual obligations and who's going to play which part in the process. And there may be some attention paid to contracts, and I know that still in this industry a lot is done on trust and a handshake, and I think some businesses might have to find themselves in the unfamiliar position of writing things down in some cases. So that I'm sure there will be local requirements, but I've no idea what they are times 27.
I think just before we break, it's worth saying we do have our colleague Ignacio here from Comité Vin, and we obviously have a good, close relationship with Spirits Europe, the European spirits body. All I would say is, there is a really good example of something that, frankly, none of us know yet. As things develop, we hope we will know. It may be, as I referred right at the beginning, that the first thing is to identify the question, which is why these sessions are actually very useful for us as well. If we can identify the question, then we have a question that doesn't have an answer. We may find that we get the answer first, you get the answer first, Ignacio or a colleague gets the answer first. But what we will try and do is make sure that we are logging the answers, or at least what things we think are happening in practice. The truth is, as I said, it will get more complicated, and the chances are that where we used to have a system, we will have more variety. I don't think there's much that we can do about that, and the rationalisation options further into the future for all imports and exports are probably, a few steps and years away. We will go through a period of more complexity before we're able to rationalise. Again, it's not the best message, but I'm afraid that is certainly how we see it.